Hello everyone, Monster Hunter Wilds is finally out, and I have been waiting for this game for around 2 years. I'm a diehard fan of the series and have over 1,000 hours in Worldborn, and the same can be said of Risebreak. I love the series to death. I also, at the time of starting this video, have 65 hours in-game and am Hunter rank 101. Yes, it's only been 3 days since release at the time of recording. Yes, I have no life outside of video games, but what I do have is a swath of information on the game in its entirety. I have completed everything, and I'm currently grinding out Godroll Artian weapons and decorations to prepare for future content we'll be getting very soon, including what Capcom is apparently calling an Endgame area. I have plenty of good to say about this game, but I want to get the negative out of the way, starting with glaring issues with the product. Performance is number one on the list. This game is not optimized well, and even though I have extremely good hardware, I can only get up to 60 frames per second, but it's not unplayable because it is steady at max settings for me, 1080p. I do have a graphical bug that's happened in my playthrough with like black triangles appearing on screen, but aside from that, I have had zero performance issues whatsoever. The only downside is that I'm usually maxing out between 60 and 70 with the occasional dip to 50 at choice moments. But that is not the case universally. I have a very playable product with my current setup, but I have a 3090 Ti with a Ryzen 9 7800X 3D. That is high tier equipment that not everybody is going to have. So if you have stuff below that, you may not be able to run this game well. So I highly advise you to do your due diligence and look up your specs on your machine before picking this game up to see if it runs well on it. Hopefully they have a pass through the patch process that improves this to some degree. I know that there's some issues with the config files that have been brought to their attention, so maybe they'll do something that will improve performance across the board. But for right now, if you're interested in the game after seeing this review, please make sure that your parts work well with it. I also want to iterate that this is mainly an issue for PC players. Console players really haven't been having any performance issues at all, as this is a console-first game. The second and final glaring issue is the co-op campaign experience. I do not have footage of this issue as I always play through all content solo until full completion before joining people. If you are someone who does want to play this game alongside a friend though, that is still possible and convenient after the campaign, but very frustrating to try to do during the story. The reason is because the game will not let you have other people in your party until cutscenes have been completed. So basically, every single mission has a cutscene that plays when you find the monster. Meaning that if you want your own hunts to have parity with your friends, you will all have to leave your missions after the cutscene plays and join your friend who has also seen the cutscene. It's a major pain, and it was present in Monster Hunter World as well, so they really have no excuse for this, and I find this to be a massive flop from Capcom, as it does drive a lot of new players away from the game. Again, I want to make it very clear that this is not an issue that persists after the main story, and Monster Hunter is usually like the bulk of the game is after the story. So just pointing out, this is not a permanent issue, it's only temporary until you're done with the story, but it still really sucks that this has not been resolved after 7 years, because it is just them shooting themselves in the foot and driving new players away. So, shame on them, I don't know why it's still here. That's it for glaring issues. Those are the red flags, and those are the only red flags. We will now talk about everything the game does right, and let's talk about story first since we're on the subject. This is going to be a largely spoiler-free review of the story, so it's going to be short and sweet. The story is an actual story this time around, which is something that we haven't really had in World and Rise. What I mean by that is that the story in World and Rise were primarily a catalyst for the fights, and that was their only purpose. Cool things happened with the story in Rise's expansion Sunbreak, where we actually had impactful lore given to us as well as motive. There was a goal we were working towards outside of the gameplay drive to hunt more monsters. But World and Iceborne only had a threadbare story in both its base version and expansion. I'm not saying that these games were bad or that even the campaigns were bad, they just simply lacked a narratively compelling story, and it simply existed to serve as a vehicle to get you to hunt the next monster. They were hype machines that got you fired up and ready to hunt. In Wilds, though, they still get you fired up and ready to hunt, but we actually have a compelling narrative to accompany the badassery of the hunt, and it does leave you thinking about where the franchise can go afterwards. What you're seeing right now is the opening scene of the game, and let me tell you, it is exciting, and this is the least exciting it is all game. The cutscenes are divine, and they really hype up your character as a badass this time around. There's a lot of confidence that exudes from your hunter throughout the entirety of the story, and the fight against every apex in the game is introduced as a catastrophe-level threat, and your character firmly holds the line and charges into the fray when nobody else will. I want to mention that while this is essentially what happens in World and Rise as well, it feels more like a job that you're fulfilling in those games, rather than stepping up to the occasion. This campaign honestly gave me goosebumps from how locked in our hunter is when staring death in the eye during these scenes. Also, your hunter is not a silent protagonist this time around. He actually does speak during the story. Now, in Rise, we did have hunters talking during the hunt. Like, they'll say things like, watch out, or get out of the way when the monster's doing a big move or something like that. But we never actually had them speak during the story. They were always silent. This game, your hunter does speak. They have very few words. They're not exactly going to be singing songs out here or giving speeches, but they absolutely do speak. And even small things like affirmations and small commands do go a long way to humanize the character and not just make them feel like a walking prop. So, I think they did it pretty well here. It's always a bit of a risky decision when you decide to go from silent to spoken, and they did it well here, and I honestly think it makes the hunters seem a lot more badass, as well as just humanizing them to the point where they don't seem like they're just simply a prop standing up there for you to look at. Also, they did make Palicos speak English, or whatever language you want them to. Palicos speak non-Palico language. Now, some people find that off-putting. You can change that in the settings. You can decide whether you want it on or off. I tried it off for the beta on my PlayStation and on for the beta on my PC, and it actually didn't suck as much as I thought it would when I ran them with just regular English and everything like that. So I actually kept it on for the full game, and I really did like it. There are a lot of times where I think the Palicos can actually be funny, and I feel like it would have been lost on us if it was just replaced with like a cat meowing and then some subtitles. But to each their own. I'm not going to recommend it if you think it's weird, because, we've had cats just simply be cats from now on, and now they speak. So that's a bit of a jarring change for a lot. But it grew on me, and I liked it.
Yes, we are. You guys do your thing. Let's go. We have our own job to do.
Right. Azuz is in your hands.
Understood.
And pause! One major pain point of the story, though, is what I call story tours, where you are locked into a slow-paced walk through the area where your party discusses things related to the story. I'm all for exposition during these moments, as well as long talking parts, but these sections also lock the player out of any kind of exploration entirely, aside from moving your camera, which is a big no-no in a game packed with such interesting environments. It's especially painful because each of these sections can last anywhere from 1 to 4 minutes, so it feels painstakingly long at points. And for those players that aren't interested in the story at all, they will certainly lose their mind waiting for these sections to end so they can get back to fighting. We will talk more about environments during a different section of the video, but one thing I do want to talk about in the story section is the villages. I think these are a really cool addition to the game, as each biome has a signature village that lives there. They do have different cultures that are very noticeable, and more importantly, food. Now, we will talk more about food in a different section of the video as well, but these do actually provide in-game benefits and buffs to your character, and they are not just a one-off thing that you experience in the story. These meals can become a regular occurrence for you in the post-game as well.
It's so fragrant. Do you use a special kind of flower?
I don't know about special, but it pairs well with the beans.
Here you go.
Thank you.
But to really play off of this, each biome you visit has their own sub-story within the overall story that you need to tackle before you can move on. And I honestly really like this, not only because they do sub-stories really well, but because the changes you make in the story to these villages do have a permanent effect on the game, and things like the Fire Spring Festival in Azuz can be seen in real time after you are done with the story. It's a very cool change, and it makes the world feel alive because the events of all these places do take place on an in-game seasonal cycle, known as the fallow/plenty cycle. Each biome has different effects that pop up in-game, like environmental changes that you can use during your hunts, as well as villages participating in certain rituals depending on the season. All of these villages are also chock full of people either working, chatting, or just hanging out, and none of them feel boring or phoned in. Like I said earlier, I'm not going to give you any story spoilers, but my thoughts on the story is that it is good, probably the best one we've had, and I'm excited to see where it goes whenever the expansion comes out in like 1 to 2 years. Also, the campaign lasts about 15 to 20 hours, I want to say. The story is not over when you roll credits, by the way. That's a very common thing in Monster Hunter games. A lot of people are hanging it up after the credits to do like a review or something. They call the game too easy because they've only played low rank. It's not the hardest Monster Hunter game we've ever had, but it certainly is not as easy as people are making it out to be. They simply are getting like halfway through the game and then not actually doing anything else. Just letting you know, the story ends after the mission you unlock at Hunter rank 40. And now it's time to talk about where this game really shines, the gameplay. Okay, so gameplay. I am not gonna lie, guys, it's really hard for me to not be biased in this section because I have been having an absolutely addicting amount of fun with this. Like, I did back-to-back 20-hour streams. That's how much I love this game. But I will defend my reasons, and I'll give you all an insight to how it all works this time around because there are some pretty massive changes. Firstly, all weapons got fancy new movesets and additions added to them from World, but that's a given. Of the new mechanics, though, we have focus mode and the wound system. Both are pretty massive in terms of changing the way the gameplay works. Focus mode is tied to the left trigger on controllers, and whenever you see a crosshair of some sort appear on my screen, that means I'm using focus mode. It's an incredible tool for repositioning your attacks that would have otherwise missed in previous titles. It will change animations for some of your moves, allow you to move around easier, at least it does that for Longsword, and it allows you to see wounds. But what are wounds? Wounds are new to Monster Hunter Wilds, and they are kind of weak spots that will open up on a monster once a certain area has sustained enough damage. These wounds can either be attacked regularly, they will provide a pretty significant damage boost. One of the best ways to deal damage to the monster is to do regular attacks to a wound. They will eventually pop once you do enough damage, or they can be popped manually through something called a focus strike. Some weapons revolve around focus strikes, like the longsword you're seeing right now. Anytime I pop a wound with a focus strike, my sword will go up to another charge level. It's really beneficial for me to pop those, but they also apply a significant amount of flinch to the monster and can cause knockdowns whenever you get enough wounds popped. Learning how to properly use focus mode is just as important as learning how to properly engage with the wound system, and learning both of these systems will make a dramatic difference in your hunts. Now, there are some complaints about the wound system, but not because it's not fun to interact with, but simply because it sometimes makes the game too easy. I truly don't care about that side of things because we are only in high rank and every Monster Hunter is usually very easy when it launches. New players are definitely still going to struggle with this game. If they haven't played a Monster Hunter before, that's just how it is. New players are going to struggle while the veterans thrive. I'm sure that by the time Master Rank rolls around, whenever that expansion gets added, the wound system is not going to trivialize the game like some of the veterans are saying it does right now. I kind of like that it's in there because it adds more incentive to attack non-natural weak spots on monsters. Like, I don't want to gang up on the head if my other teammates are there. If I can just get away with attacking a back leg or something, I would absolutely do that. And on top of that, it allows you to exploit the monster's weaknesses to create situations for yourself. And I always advocate for having more control over a hunt because it makes it more predictable for myself, and it lets me feel like I am the one that's actually dominating this monster instead of going back and forth. Although that back and forth can be very fun, overcoming it feels very rewarding. Another feature that is universally praised is the addition of clashes and offset attacks. Some weapons have access to these, but some of them don't. Unfortunately, my main weapon, the longsword, does not, but it's okay, that thing is strong enough as is. I did swap over to greatsword for this hunt though to show it off. A clash happens occasionally when you perfect block a monster's attack. That means blocking right before it hits. Overcoming a clash by winning the power struggle will knock down the monster and give you a small window to punish. Clashes can be done by any weapon that has a block feature. There's also offset attacks though. Not every weapon has these either. It's usually reserved for weapons that look like they have higher impact or pack a punch. I believe Insect Glaive is also a part of this though too, so you can use it there as well. An offset attack is an attack where if you land it at the moment a monster attacks you, will give you a free knockdown and allows you to do a devastating follow-up punish on it as well. This is not universally activated though, and each weapon that has an offset attack available to it has a different way of activating it. These require precise timing, and you will get heavily punished if you mess it up, just like that. You can also do sneak attacks if you run up behind a monster with your weapon sheathed and they don't notice you. Sneak attack. Overall, this Monster Hunter isn't as fast-paced as Rise is, but in my own personal opinion, I think it is the grittiest and the most satisfying. The environment itself is just as much a weapon as the one on your back. We'll talk more about that when we get there though. But as far as combat goes, it blends weapon skill with resourcefulness beautifully, and taming the battleground feels just as rewarding as taming your weapon, of which there are 14 entirely unique ones present in the game for all of you who are new to the series.
That was so badass.
We've mainly been talking about combat from the mechanical side of things, but if we're going to talk about visuals now, which is what I want to focus on, look at these elemental effects. This is a dragon type weapon, so it's black and red, and this is, emphasized for every element in the game. Thunder is going to be very bright white and blue, fire, obviously orange. But watch as the dragon, the black and red effects from this, follow this Chatacabra after I do my Helm Splitter. It is just a beautiful sight to see, and I think this looks better than Rise and World put together, if I'm being honest. It's just so visually appealing, and this goes for all weapons. It's not just the weapons that are visually appealing though, the monsters are too, mainly their deconstruction. I'm basically fighting Gravio, someone that I did not like at first until I found out that his underside is where his weak spot is, so you want to kind of sit there. I don't know if you can see it right now, but we've basically completely carved away his stone skin armor, and exposed his stomach directly. The fact that we can see that though, and the fact that as we hit it, it gets more and more opened up to us is something that I really appreciate. It's one of those small details that goes a long way for me. Monster Hunter isn't like a gore game or anything like that, but we are literally slashing these things to pieces for upwards of like 10-15 minutes sometimes, and I would like there to be some kind of sign of the work that we've been putting in. Now the wound system is great and all, you do see scars when that happens, but it's also really nice to just see the weapons doing damage to them and actually tearing them apart visually. This happens with part breaks in previous games and everything, but I think it's much more pronounced here, and the level of viscera, like the visceral nature of the game here, is something that really goes a long way with me, and I think it will for you too if you appreciate small details like that. Another complaint I've seen is that people actually think that there's not a lot of monsters here. There are 28, and I've only been playing ever since World, but 28 seems like a pretty healthy launch number. They will be adding more, but I also am curious because like all 28 of these monsters are extremely fun to fight, except for maybe like the tutorial ones like Chatacabra and Clematrus, but the rest of them are all like really good to fight in my opinion. So I'm very happy with the amount we have, considering the detail put into each and every one of them. And for as detailed as they are, and I really do mean they are really detailed fights, they just don't have enough health unless they're not apexes. Like you're seeing me right now fight one of two monsters in the game that provide a bit of a challenge for veteran players, and it would be really nice if they did another difficulty pass in the very near future with their endgame hub area update or whatever's coming soon, to at least give the non-apexes either like another level of temper for us to farm and give us a reason to farm them in the endgame, or just give them an overall health buff. The Sacred is a new animal added to the game, and it serves as your mount. Now there was no mount in World/Iceborne, but in Rise you did have Palamutes if you wanted. These are not as fast as mounts, and to be fair, they are a tiny bit clunkier to use in my opinion, but I think they are an overall improvement as the purpose they serve is fantastic. They allow you to sharpen your weapons, they allow you to use items if you want, your slinger, but most importantly, they take you directly to the monster, which is great because it lets you just kind of focus on yourself, and if the monster ever runs away, your trusty Secret can just take you to it again. A lot of people don't like that. They like the sense of the hunt that was in World, but unfortunately for those people, that is gone. So if you weren't a fan of the hunt, good news, you could just have to go straight to the monster and fight it. So You'll win this time around. No, seriously though, it's what I believe it to be extremely convenient, and you are allowed to branch off the path. A lot of people think that you don't have control over this; it limits exploration, but you do have full control over your sacred as well if you want. It also has a great combat functionality because it allows you to get a lot of aerial damage off without needing to ledge hop or anything like that, which allows you to get easy mounts. We might as well talk about mounts right now anyways. They did change it from World a tiny bit. It's not Licorice at all. It's just an iteration of World that's been expanded upon. Now you can change different body parts as you could in World and inflict stab wounds on them. You can also do weapon attacks on them to kind of open up wounds. And if you end up doing a weapon attack on a wound, you'll do a substantially large chunk of damage and get a guaranteed knockdown as you would in World. Sacrets are also great support if you're in danger, as they can pick you up whenever you're knocked down. This is a great way of getting out of danger and can put you out of harm's way in a heartbeat, but it's not a 100% guarantee, and sometimes they can even pick you up into an attack. Some monsters are designed to punish that specifically. Okay, now it's time to talk about one of the most important elements of a Monster Hunter game, the food. It's much simpler than it was in Monster Hunter World to create your own dishes. Everyone kind of just gravitated towards Chef's Choice platters back in that game. And then in Rise, you did actually have some pretty cool food skills associated with it, and it was simpler than it was in World. Here, it's even simpler though, but it's still very much impactful and something you're going to be interacting with frequently. You can save loadouts too if you have specific things you want, as well as a surplus of ingredients for your favorited dishes and everything. But the thing that's really cool is, along with all this, you can build for like offensive builds, defensive builds, hybrid. You can also go for like a gathering build if you want. There's like builds with food now. I know that sounds silly, but yeah, there is, and it's very important. And on top of all that, the most important part, style over stats, is the fact that each of these translates into the cutscene you have when cooking your dish. And these cutscenes look phenomenal. Mouth-watering food is being made by our hunter here. Another great change is that food buffs now last a set amount of time. Like, this meal will last me 50 minutes, and that timer only counts down when I'm in a combat zone. So I can edit my gear without having to worry about the food buff disappearing. And it's a really great change of pace from having to come back to a hub area after every hunt and eat a new meal. Another thing that's also really great about the food system is that you don't need to be at a camp or anything to do it. You can actually do it in the field, on the fly. You can even do it during combat, though I don't know if it's the safest thing to do, so, take caution. That about wraps it up for gameplay. We're going to talk about environment right after this short cooking break.
Yeah, just in the middle.
Alright, speaking about environment, this is without a doubt, hands down, the most detailed and interactable environment we've had across any Monster Hunter game to date. There is just no argument to be had there. On top of that, I personally think it looks beautiful. Aside from the game itself not running too well, I think the art design is beautiful. There's also a seasonal cycle. You're seeing the forest in Plenty now, and now you're seeing it in Fallow. Not only do seasons provide a new coat of paint, but they also change the behavior of the environment and interactions. An example of this would be right now during the fallow, there is a higher chance of paratoads spawning in the forest. So they're going to be all over the place, and what these do is provide a benefit to me during my hunts, where if I'm fighting a monster near a paratoad, I might be able to set it off or interact with it so that I can get an easy paralyze on the monster, allowing me to have a big open damage window. One of the inverse effects of this during Plenty is that giant vigor wasps are all over the place, and these provide full heals to the player. Not only do these interactions change based on the map you're in, but you can also very clearly tell when a map is in fallow or Plenty based off of a thing in the bottom left showing you that. But on top of that, the maps do look dead during fallow versus very alive during Plenty, regardless of what map you're in. Speaking of map interactables though, let's go ahead and focus on environmental traps. Now these also change in number and location based off of the season. For instance, this area that I'm in right now doesn't quite use a Plenty fallow as it does like a calm and uncalm kind of season. And during the uncalm season, you have more boulders hanging from the ceiling you can use as traps. Maybe the monster's just slamming into walls more often and stuff like that because they're all fighting each other. Either way, regardless of the season you're in, traps will be plentiful, and you can decide to use these in the hunts however you see fit, though I will say you will highly regret ignoring them if they're available to you, because never before in this series has it paid off to be this resourceful. You can really get away with so much if you learn the environment and use it to your advantage, and this was one of the aspects I liked the most in Monster Hunter World. It wasn't really present in Rise until Sunbreak came out, but even then it was very minimal. The most we got was like the swamp area in the Citadel, which was still great, but this takes World's environmental trap design and amplifies it by 10. You will be extremely well rewarded if you're using the environment to fight these monsters just as much as you do your weapon. So the resourceful hunter is going to come out on top this time around. Also, these maps are huge, and while there are only 2 to 3 of them that are horizontally large, like the plains, the other maps get their size from vertical depth. Each floor is kind of stacked on top of each other in these maps, so it's very vertical as opposed to horizontal. You can speed up your hunts by strategically placing campsites around the map that act as fast travel points. The downside to this system, though, is that some areas are deemed more dangerous than others and run the risk of being destroyed by large monsters, rendering them useless. I am not a fan of that part of the system and think it's a poorly thought out inclusion to the feature that makes them an inconvenience to use sometimes and doesn't add enough immersion or impact to the player to make it feel like a feature that is good to interact with. Although I do have 100 hours in the game by this point in the video, and from my experience I can say that the camps, for the most part, do not get destroyed that often, and when they aren't destroyed, it is a good feature. These environments also hold many more monsters than previous titles, and it's honestly very common for a monster to make a surprise appearance in your hunt and change the outcome. That's not new to the series, but this time around, the monsters don't accidentally gang up on you when they both end up aggroing you because they don't have a scripted turf war. The monsters will take each other seriously and view each other as the main threat, and they will focus on each other instead of the player until one of the threats is removed, whether one of them flees the area or just outright dies every now and then. But it makes them way more interesting in combat because it gives the player windows to either heal, sharpen, they actually do substantial amounts of damage to each other whenever they fight, and it can give the player enough time to do a full combo attack, like right there. It feels incredibly organic, and monsters do have genuine interactions with each other on top of turf wars. They will have separate behaviors that feel authentic. The craziest example of that authenticity, and I'm sorry, but I don't have footage of this sadly because it happened completely spontaneously when I wasn't recording, was when I was hunting a Balahara and it wasn't moving. It was just remaining still underneath the sand, which is very unusual. So I used a screamer pod to get it to emerge, but as soon as it emerged, a nearby Arkfeld started pouncing on this thing and ended up doing over 14,000 damage in total to it, basically hunting the entire monster for me. It wasn't a turf war either, just a totally organic interaction where the Balahara was legitimately afraid of the apex monster roaming in its territory, so it stayed underground. Seriously cool stuff here like that. Also, here's another funny one where an Arkfeld was feasting on my hunt target, and it had a kind of weird interaction with me whenever I approached.
Oh no. No. The poor Quematress.
Yeah, I simply interrupted this when I came near, but if I would have left the Arkfeld to just keep doing his thing, there is a very real chance he would have just fully killed this Quematress. Like, he does not play around. I was only like 30 seconds into this quest, mind you, and this Quematress, by the time I got to his nest, only took me like another 30 seconds to fully kill. The interactions in this game alone are one of the highest points for me, honestly. Let's go ahead and wrap this up, though, by talking about systems and endgame. When I say system, I'm mainly talking about gear, as that is what you're going to be messing with 99% of the time that you aren't actively in the field. Gemma will be your one-stop shop for all things gear related. Now, it's your standard Monster Hunter setup here where you bring materials to her and she crafts you things. Armor has skill perks that you'll build into and play a large role as per usual, but I want to focus on the changes right now. If you notice in the bottom right here, weapons also have skills on them by default, which is a pretty big deal. This next change is very big for the series, and it's the separation of decorations into armor and weapon decorations. I was skeptical about this at first, especially for what it would do to elemental build crafting, but the weapon decorations are honestly absurd. Like, look at this one. Fire attack, maxed out, and you get a point of critical element. That's on a single decoration. So they're really strong, but the armor decorations are rather underwhelming in comparison. Now, to be fair, the game isn't really the hardest thing in the world, and armor perks intrinsically are very strong, like the ones that they have on them by default, as well as their set bonuses are very strong. But I am kind of hoping that this isn't as complex as decorations get until Master Rank expansion drops, because the deco farm is an important part of Endgame in my opinion, and I don't want it to just end so abruptly. Now let's talk about what you're going to be doing after high rank. This is the Endgame grind. Welcome to RT and weapon crafting. It's a modular crafting system that lets you create a weapon of an element of your choice, as well as put certain bonuses on it, such as attack and affinity effusions. Now, these aren't really worth interacting with unless you're going for rarity 8, and unfortunately, only Apex tempered monsters drop rarity 8, so there's only like 4 in the game that you're going to be consistently farming, which is a shame. But in order to see Apexes, you basically just open your map and take a look around, and you can see there's a few tempered monsters that aren't Apexes around, but they don't give rarity 8. If we look at Ice Shard Cliffs, though, we do have a Gormagala, which is one of the 4, and it will drop a few rarity 8 RT and weapon fragments. When you're done with your hunt, they will randomly unveil themselves into certain parts. For Longsword, for example, I need 1 blade and 2 tubes, and each part has an element and bonus tied to it. Once I craft an RT and weapon, we can go ahead and start building. How about we do a greatsword instead of a longsword real quick? So let's go ahead and do that, and I can show it off. This one requires 2 blades and a tube. So let's just make a quick thunder one. We'll just do full attack on this. I'd probably go for affinity if I was playing longsword, but go ahead and build that. And now we have our own fully personalized weapon. After crafting your RT and weapon, you can further enhance it by doing something called reinforcement. Now, in order to reinforce, you do need to use Azu's materials here, the best of which is the Auracalcite. In order to get Auracalcite, you can get it very rarely from festival rewards, occasionally from Azu's, or you can just do what the main way of doing it's going to be, which is sacrificing some monster parts that you've hoarded up in order to smelt the ore. A lot of people were concerned about how much of a grind this would be to get these upgrade materials, and as somebody who's already maxed out like 7 or 8 of these things, it really isn't that big of a deal. You do indeed get showered with monster parts during these hunts, so don't worry about getting the materials. It's not going to be that hard to acquire them. This is where the RNG element comes in though. You spend your resources to get 5 random enhancements on top of the ones you get for simply crafting. Now, this one wasn't too great for my sword, at least not by longsword standards, but this is a great sword, so I don't know what people are looking for here. You can see there we got 2 attack boosts to sharpness, an element, and an affinity boost. What really sets RT and weapons apart from everything else Gemma can make though is the decoration slots. Without these decoration slots all being level 3, RT and weapons very well may not have been worth it at all, but these decoration slots do definitively put it above anything else that Gemma can make. Not by much though, and I think that's where the magic of the game comes in, because it doesn't force people to play, because I'm sure whenever they add more content in, people are going to be like, oh, I don't have my RT and weapons, I can't compete. That won't be true. You can indeed use regular stuff that Gemma uses, because the upper scaling of RT and weapons isn't that much higher than what she has. Yes, they are better, yes, they're very min-maxy, but you can still get the job done with anything Gemma has, and I think that's the perfect way of handling an endgame grind. Give us something to grind for to get better, but don't make it mandatory. Also, I have seen a lot of people concerned about not getting enough materials from their hunts in general to make RT and weapons in the first place, but let me reassure you by looking through my investigations that you do indeed get a ton of these things whenever doing a double hunt. So yeah, no real shortage here. You're going to be drowning in parts. I think that's another reason this endgame grind is the best we've had across both World and Rise, because not only is it not mandatory, but they also shower you in loot, so it's very easy to engage with without putting in a lot of time. One more system I do want to talk about before wrapping up the review is the material automation acquisition. In previous games, we had like a botanical garden or an argosy, what we'd have to constantly check up on and manage in order to get resource automation for it. Here, though, after building up reputation in each of the settlements, you can speak with a representative and they'll simply forage items for you. This is better by a mile than either of the previous systems because, one, you don't have to actually have any input, they'll just do it for you. And two, you get a lot more both amounts of resources and different types of resources. So each of them have their own pools of loot you can go to, but they also have things you can focus on. So obviously honey and bitterbug broth are used for a lot of consumables. So I have them focus those, and then I just kind of let the others kind of do whatever they want. As far as things go, like food ingredients or other things like that that aren't as readily available, you can also establish relationships with traders in each of the settlements simply by talking to them, not by doing anything crazy special or anything. And then you will be able to trade with them for these things. Nata is also like your central hub guy for every settlement, so that you don't have to travel to them and actually talk. He will handle all things related to the cities, aside from like Azu's smelting. So yeah, I think this is a great system, and it's much better than previous games. That's my review and explanation of the game. Final thoughts from me here is that this is the best Monster Hunter game, at least base game, that we've ever had, and I really don't think it's even close in my opinion. There isn't much content right now, but what we do have is very, very fun and very well made. If you are looking for more content, though, I'd give it at least 4 to 8 months, as there should be a healthy amount of title updates in that time, and these are all free, by the way. But seriously, this game blew me away and went beyond my expectations in terms of combat and environmental design, which are what I look for in Monster Hunter games. The rest is purely extra, to me as a player. The only thing holding this game back from being universally praised is its performance. The game doesn't look great, and it doesn't run great, and that's a very serious issue. That's not something that should be shrugged off lightly, and it's a real shame that it shipped the way it did on PC. I'm sure the complaints about difficulty will be thrown back in our faces with new content, because, as is usual with Monster Hunter games, they're very easy at the start, and very hard once they add more stuff. So that's not really a concern for me. Yeah, I hope you guys found this video helpful though, and if you did, please show the video some love, as the algorithm is probably not gonna favor me here, so any support goes a long way, truly. This took a lot of time and effort to make this video, not only because of my investment in the game, but because I am a one-man team here, so it takes a lot to gather all the footage and edit it all together and write the script and all this stuff. So yeah, it's just a lot, and any kind of payoff would be great. So yeah, I also stream on Twitch though, so if you ever want to hang out, feel free to stop by and say hello. I hope you all have a great day, enjoy the game, and I'm Haderaxe, signing out. Peace.